Yukon First Nations have always acknowledged the importance of information gathering. In the olden days, this happened through observing the environment carefully, then passing on observations through telling of stories. First Nations across the country share this importance of oral history and have acted in similar ways as the survival and preservation of culture were at stake. With the arrival of colonizers in Canada, new institutions came about with different ways of teaching and information gathering, which they called research. These further evolved with the invention of computers and the Internet. An expert society was created where the experts are now academic researchers with university degrees who specialized in specific and often small or specialized areas of science. The majority of these experts are not of First Nations descent, but would speak with authority on the health of First Nations, or rather, their illnesses. First Nations across Canada became frustrated by these negative portrayals that contributed to stereotypes and systemic racism. They also grew tired with the way research was conducted in First Nations communities, not only because the research was negative and provided no context on why the health and social conditions were the way they were, the research also happened with little involvement and capacity building of the First Nations themselves who lived in the area. In time, these First Nations advocates came together as they realized that joining voices and forces makes you stronger and helps you achieve more. They decided that it would be better for First Nations themselves to do research so that they could do it in a way that was more respectful and reflective of First Nations. In 1998, they came up with the First Nations principles of OCAP: ownership, control, access, and possession. These principles help to guide all aspects of data gathering and research for First Nations. In 2010, a First Nations-led nonprofit organization called the First Nations Information Governance Center, FNIGC, was created to oversee the undertaking of national surveys specific for First Nations and to protect and promote OCAP. Yukon First Nations applauded these developments that allowed First Nations to take back their rights to gather, own, control, access, and possess information about their people, as they understood that this is fundamentally tied to self-determination. In 2000, they asked to be part of the First Nation-specific surveys that FNIGC developed and oversaw. CYFN also asked their Health and Social Service Director to represent the Yukon on the FNIGC Board of Directors. In 2002, the Council of Yukon First Nations, CYFN, took on the role as Survey Action Hero and Data Steward. CYFN committed to coordinate and undertake the information gathering in the First Nations communities in the Yukon, in close collaboration with all of the communities. This was done carefully, so that it accurately and respectfully represents each Yukon First Nation and their uniqueness. Data gathering starts only when a community and its leadership have agreed to participate in the survey. The data gathered in a First Nation belongs to that First Nation, and CYFN only holds the data for them. This means that the Yukon First Nations data that CYFN holds is owned by 14 First Nations. CYFN doesn't assume that all First Nations are the same. They know that despite the differences, the data, when pulled together, is the most powerful. To understand the relationship better, let's look at this like a puzzle. The data collected in one community is owned and controlled by this community and becomes one puzzle piece in a larger data set. CYFN then builds a Yukon puzzle out of the 14 pieces which represent the 14 Yukon First Nations. The respective First Nations still own and control their piece of the puzzle, and CYFN becomes the steward of all the data together. This allows CYFN to conduct a Yukon-level analysis of the survey data and to produce a Yukon-level report of the statistics similar to what the Yukon government does with the Yukon Health Status reports. Similarly, CYFN then gives the FNIGC permission to include the whole Yukon data set in the national data set and conduct a national-level analysis. Data analysts then take careful measures to keep the data confidential and safe. No data will ever be released that can identify a person or community. Only anonymous data is published in reports or shown in presentations. An example is, for half of First Nations youth, 50.5%, knowing and learning traditional teachings is very important. If there are sufficient numbers in a community data set, a community-level analysis can be undertaken. The benefits of being able to conduct different levels of analysis is that it is easier to see where we fit into a national picture. A number on its own doesn't mean much. But if we know, for example, that the occurrence of diabetes in the Yukon is 7%, but 16 in Canada, then we know that we are doing better here than the rest of the country. By comparing numbers, we can see what our most pressing issues are and in what areas we are doing well. The data can also be used for strategic planning and proposal writing. FNIGC and CYFN have become recognized experts in the way that we gather and disseminate information. FNIGC is often asked to do presentations for universities, governments, and organizations, such as the Assembly of First Nations. The 2015 Yukon Health Status Report published by the Yukon government used statistics from the Yukon RHS. CYFN was also asked to review and comment on all the First Nations elements that were included in the Health Status Report. The Yukon model is being used as a working example for other provinces and territories in Canada, and CYFN is very proud of this. The continued aim is to make statistics more holistic and not just focus on only negative things affecting First Nations peoples. The strengths and skills, gifts, and culture all aim to give a more positive outlook and tell a more balanced story of the everyday lives of First Nations people and communities. CYFN's job is to paint a balanced picture of the health and well-being of Yukon First Nations so that together we can all build on the good, find solutions for the not-so-good, and empower each community.